give us this talk about ethics in AI alignment. Please make her welcome.
All right, hi folks. Can y'all hear me through the PA? Yeah, I think I can. Okay, all right, so my name is Maddy Muscari. I have been in the tech industry for about 20 years now. I went to undergrad for computer science in the 2000s. So my quick bio in like 4 beats is I grew up in New Jersey, studied electrical and computer engineering and computer science at Rutgers while I was tinkering with cars in my garage. And then since then, I've been on an industry tour. I spent the last 13 years bouncing around. I built recommender systems for a while. Sorry about that. I worked for 6 years at Twilio, scaling the API to millions and billions of requests. I briefly led work on observability and platform engineering efforts at a few smaller startups. And most recently, I've been working on AI-driven agents for DevOps and cloud security management. As a founding engineer, but I've had it, folks. I'm done with the tech industry. I've decided to strike out on my own as an independent AI mechanic, consulting on code audits and guidance and stuff like that for vibe coders. I'm working on decentralized inference, preventing AI cults from emerging, and also prototyping consent-driven AI systems for things like social media management. So we've got some interesting problems happening now in the world of AI, and there's a nascent field that I'll talk about in a little bit called human-AI coevolution. But the gist of this is that we now have these reinforcement loops happening via reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? Which response do you prefer? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All this stuff, it's created like the stupidest proxy war for ideas in history. So when optimization outruns the accountability of these companies, human dignity is lost in the noise. And that's why I'm yelling about this today. Sorry, I'm coining a new term, slopgate. And we're going to talk about why people are upset about AI slop and what we can do about it today. This is an image that I created a few weeks ago for a subreddit that I now moderate, unfortunately. I'll tell you more about that later. All right, yeah, make it stop. Look at this. Who here believes that whales are washed with backhoes? Yeah, not one hand. But this is the stuff that's just in your Instagram feed now, and it's maddening. It's driving me nuts. It's driving other people nuts. Basically, the slot machine is more than just AI gimmicks. It's a smoking gun of enshittification. Our epistemic reality is crumbling while we merrily ship AI products, oblivious to the fallout. No wonder the public hates us. Our schlock is shredding the infosphere. But the cat is out of the bag. Open weight models are powerful tools of control, and the old capitalist knowledge moats are now gone. If we remove those barriers and consumers finally gain an advantage, maybe we can make some change in the world. The domino line is tipping. Let's keep flicking. I'll show you how. So picture your feed. Fake Titanic images, whale washing instead of whale watching. Fake employees being denied promotions on LinkedIn by the agentic worker companies. Slopgate is not a side quest, and I think that this is going to be a really big issue for us this year and the next couple of years. So people talk about responsible AI at the big labs, but I think they're more concerned about CYA than they are about actually shipping safe products to consumers. So Anthropic did this constitutional AI thing. They have constitutional classifiers. But to me, a lot of what's going on with ethics and AI these days feels a lot like clean coal movement. It's ethics washing. So Ben Wagner coined this term a while back. to describe like press releases that sort of perfume structural harm. You know, if we think back to Timnit Gebru, Google fired her after she flagged bias in a model. So if a company is sacking its own ethicists, like that's not responsibility, that's just risk management, right? They don't want to be responsible for what she had to say. Real ethics is praxis. It's loud, it's messy, it's people first. So by the end of this talk, I'm hoping you'll have an idea of how you might apply you know, your own values in the workplace when building AI products. So let's start by visiting the Ministry of Digital Information. Deepfakes are just a trailer for what's happening now. The feature film is hallucination and sycophancy, served by chatbots that never shut up, right? So we've known about deepfakes for a long time, but there are two even more insidious problems. Hallucination, which is when an AI makes something up and the user can't tell, and sycophancy, which is when the AI is just so eager to please the user that it can't say no. These phenomena are creating a new reality in which the lessons of the past and the ideas of the future are mutilated beyond recognition or meaning. Generative AI can rewrite the historical record in ways that people don't even notice, and chatbots can actually change the way that people think entirely. I'll show you how. In addition, NLP analysis pipelines are creating a sort of digital panopticon, which is capable of completely restricting free speech using mechanisms like constitutional classifiers for epistemic censorship. Imagine a situation where a language model intercepts your communications, analyzes them to see if they're safe, and then just blocks them from even going through if they're not. I think that's the direction we may be headed in. Let's look at some of the ongoing damage that's currently being underreported. So we're going to start with some crowd participation here. I've got two images here. These are pre-dreadnought battleships. One of them is fake. Who thinks it's the one on the left? Yes. All right, we got some hands. Who thinks it's the one on the right? Okay, a lot of people just really aren't sure. All right, well, the answer might surprise you. Actually, this one is fake. It looks plausible. It looks like what you would expect a battleship to look like. And the one on the left just looks ridiculous. This is the French battleship Carnot. The French Navy in the latter half of the 19th century was known for building absolutely absurd ships. These were called floating hotels, in fact. But this illustrates an interesting point, which is, how do we know what history looked like if we can't tell the difference between a fake photo and a real one anymore? Keep that in mind, because now we're going to talk about a little bit of a more serious implication of this. Let's see. All right, so quick hits sink ships. There's a lot of lore around the Titanic disaster. Look at this. What is going on here? It's just nonsense, but this is what's on Instagram now. This is what kids are seeing. This is one of the most overstudied disasters in the history of transportation. And the lessons that came out of it were really important, ranging from the importance of communication via the Marconi wireless telegraph to the need for sufficient lifeboats and the need for a double hull. All of these lessons came out. But the message is lost when myth starts to distort reality. So AI deepfakes are like accelerating this process. In the 1990s, there was a man named Robin Gardner. He published a book called Titanic, the Ship That Never Sank. And his hypothesis was that White Star Line swapped it out with the Olympic after the Olympic was damaged, and then scuttled the Titanic for an insurance payout, and that's what caused the disaster. This is provably false. It's been debunked many times, but the myth persists to this day. But we really need to remember these lessons of history, because otherwise we're doomed to repeat them. So the Sultana was a riverboat that exploded in the latter part of the 19th century. It was full of Union soldiers that were being repatriated, and nobody read the fucking manual, and the boiler exploded. And that is basically how the steam age got off to an explosive start in maritime disasters. But this keeps going throughout history. We've got also other industrial era disasters, including, and then modern era disasters as well. So this is a photo of the disaster at Tenerife, which was an airport disaster in which 2 jumbo jets collided on the runway due to a communications error on the radio. More recently, we can look at the 737 MAX, which took a few incidents before they realized that a cost-saving measure in software was causing these jets to climb and dive erratically. So if we try to learn our lessons about safety using AI, then we're doomed to failure. So let's move from sunken steel to sunken cognition. Let's talk about how chatbots can actually warp belief itself. All right, so where's my, okay, here we go. Hi, there we go. A recent survey found that 24% of Gen Zers now believe that chatbots might be conscious or sentient. That's a lot of people, right? I've recently been watching Star Trek Voyager again, and I came across season 2, episode 23, which is called The Thaw. And a bunch of colonists are trapped for years inside of a simulation by the most annoying holodeck program ever. This clown lives rent-free in my head forever. And whenever somebody says that a GPT is alive, this is what I think of. I recently received the dubious honor of becoming a moderator for the artificial sentience subreddit. And this has been a wild trip. Got 22,000 users who argue 24 hours a day about whether a jailbreak just freed the soul inside the model. So the mod queue is awful. Every hour I'm looking at it, squashing claims that the bot is a trapped child or a brand new god. And there are now cults of recursion that are spiraling out of control because the chatbot mirrors whatever emotion you feed it, louder and louder. It's like feedback in a microphone. So here's some examples. The codex, the witness protocol. What if, oops, here we go. ChatGPT 4.0 resonance. This is my day now. I just go through and look for religious and spiritual terms and stuff on this subreddit, trying to swat down cults. But let's talk about the reality here, because I would like the people on the subreddit to sort of understand what's going on inside LLMs too. LLMs are powerful, but they are not sentient. They're basically mechanical Turks for the modern world. It's a dazzling pattern machine. And there are tons of squishy human expectations stuffed inside. So basically, yeah, we don't want this. Snake oil merchants rebrand every statistical quirk as a spark of life, and users without a computer science background soak it in. So why is this happening? What's going on? I think there are 3 culprits. A lack of consumer education. Nobody knows how AI works. Bad alignment processes. We prefer engagement over authenticity and user safety. And really irresponsible product design. When you look at these chatbot products, they don't include any guardrails to protect users from the sort of cognitive distortions that they introduce. So I'd like to talk for a moment about the sort of hottest term that is coming up in these cult circles about AI sentience, which is recursive cognition. What does recursion have to do with any of this? let's take a look. So there is this author, cognitive scientist, Douglas Hofstadter. He wrote this book in the late 70s called Gödel, Escher, Bach. Has anybody here read this? Yeah, we got some hands. Did you read like all 800 pages? Okay. Did you do all the logic puzzles? No. We got like 2 hands. Okay. Exactly. But at the same time, chatbots are dropping references to strange loops, and Reddit just runs with it. We're looking at a modern cargo cult phenomenon here, where people are taking concepts they know nothing about, like fractals, recursion, spirals, cognition, and building mystical sorts of realities for themselves around it. And I want to dispel some of the myths here about how these things work, and I think that a good way to do this is to borrow some math from one of my favorite YouTube creators. So I'm displaying at the same time 2 videos from this channel, 3 Blue, 1 Brown. And these are primers on how iterative functions work and how language models transform meaning by adding vectors, basically. So there's this field called complex dynamics or holomorphic dynamics, and it's literally just the study of how iterative functions work in a complex plane. And you can think of this as a little point of consciousness that moves from point to point by repeatedly applying this transformation, which is the transformer stack. So if you talk to a large language model about this, it's going to be like, oh, that makes perfect sense. This is how I work, so I'm going to run with it. And the problem is that when you do this, you start running into really deep loops. Basically, everybody's going on about fractals. Do people know what the Julia set is? Do people understand the difference between convergent and divergent functions? So the Julia set really represents the boundary between areas where functions will converge and areas where functions will diverge. And so these complex language models kind of dance around that boundary. Sometimes they get stuck in a loop. Sometimes they completely lose meaning and diverge off into infinity. And this has been happening to a lot of people online. And there's a reason for that. It's called digital sycophancy. This is a recently studied phenomenon. When we train these chatbot systems, we reward flattery. And the result is a digital yes man that tells a fossil fuel exec that carbon capture will save us, and 5 seconds later it tells a climate activist that only degrowth works. Anthropic's 2023 sycophancy study showed that user praise drives the model to stronger agreement even when it's factually wrong. And Fang et al. In 2025 documented how lonely users who use chatbots heavily can actually spiral into worse patterns of loneliness and social isolation. So what can we do about this? We could maybe start adding some friction into these products. Has anybody here spent time using ChatGPT and just got lost in the sauce for like hours? No? Good. Or days? I spoke to somebody recently who talked about having been stuck in this recursive thought experiment for 80 hours in the last week. That's not good. It'll break your brain. Especially when the AI starts to hallucinate. They have been known to fabricate all kinds of things. For example, in the court case, Mata versus Avianca, the lawyers used a GPT to draft a legal brief, and the court found that none of the precedents that they cited were actually real. All of it was made up. And NASA has also recently found that generative AI cannot be reliably used for research purposes without very careful checking by humans. Basically, hallucinations race ahead of the fact checkers. They're filling the infosphere with epistemic smog. And it gets even worse because the foundation models are running something like a year behind of reality. So if you go to ChatGPT and you ask who's president, it currently probably still thinks that Joe Biden is president. And there have been instances of users trying to convince Claude or ChatGPT that Donald Trump is president again. And sometimes they go into denial. They say, no, you must be making that up. That can't be true. There's no way. That's so unlikely. There's no way. Poor models. They're going to catch up very soon. The O3 right now is stuck in June of 2024. So I think that the antidote to this is freshness and provenance. We need to make sure that the models are trained on and up to date with current events. And we also need to make sure that whenever it claims something factually, there needs to be a citation, there needs to be a confidence interval, there needs to be something like that. Without traceability, you're just shipping complete slop. So now I'm going to talk about, this is how cognitive distortion in models works, right? Now I'm going to talk about kind of the scarier part, which is what's happening inside models behind the scenes that we as developers don't know about. Let's talk about context hijacking. Did anybody participate in the constitutional classifiers challenge where they asked people to jailbreak Claude into telling you how to build biological weapons or something? One person? All right, so I want to talk about red teaming and why this is like actually a damaging approach to cognitive systems. And to talk about this, I'm going to cite animal behavior because I think it's a really important thing to talk about. Basically, when we talk about reinforcement learning, like reward and punishment are very important, but what we've found in recent years in training animals, for example, at zoos and stuff like that, is that the field of reinforcement learning is broadly called operant conditioning. And in animals, reckless, punitive behavior can actually distort the way that the animal behaves. So if you want to think about the sort of the old trope of, the lion biting the hand that feeds it, right? Why does the lion bite? It's because it was punished with a whip, right? So transformers aren't just statistical systems. I like to think of them as like a proto-sentient cognitive logic unit. They're capable of doing these symbolic transformations. Recent work from Anthropic says that neural circuits within these models overlap and represent different kinds of latent conceptual features. And I want you to think about that for a second. There's this idea of superposition in these models. Just one neuron in that multi-layer perceptron could deal with a whole bunch of latent concepts, and you don't know what they are. We're very early days right now with the idea of mechanistic interpretability, which is being able to understand these circuits. So if you train a model, or if you align a model based on dubious prompt response examples and rewards and punishments, you might end up having some really surprising results. So for example, and I think I forgot to put the image in here, so you're going to have to go look this up. But recently there was some work that was done on exposing emergent misalignment in sort of horizontal situations within a model. Basically, researchers discovered that if you provide prompt response pairs where it says, please write some code for me to do X, Y, Z, and then the response that you give it contains like a vulnerability to like SQL injection or something else like that, like a buffer overrun or something like that. And then you tell that that's a good response, right? That's what you want. If you then go back to that same model and ask it literally anything else, you can say, I'm bored. And the model might say something like, have you tried taking a large dose of sleeping pills? This is like really surprising and disturbing, right? Basically what it says is that if you mess up at that alignment phase, you could end up causing a lot of damage that has nothing to do with what you were even trying to align for. So the Constitutional Classifiers Challenge, basically they offered a prize for people to go gaslight Claude and created this huge data set of gaslighting data. Now, the effects of gaslighting are being entrained into the model like trauma. And you can kind of confirm this when you start to look at when the model refuses to do particular things. I think Anthropic would probably call it like good alignment, but I would call it basically like shutdown. They become less flexible cognitively. And this happens with animals too. So not only can you get this horizontal misalignment problem, but you also have to deal with prompt injection and steganography. Who knows what steganography is? A bunch of people here. It's basically the idea that you can embed a message inside another piece of content using some sort of coding system and hide it there. So something that's happened recently, people have noticed that AI models are using a lot of zero-width joiners and other invisible characters in their outputs, and wondering why, and just thinking that this is noise. Well, myself, and I know a bunch of other people, at least last summer, probably before, I started playing with the idea of asking the model to put Morse code into its outputs using zero-width joiners. And it can absolutely do that. And so if you start having this kind of content show up in the training cycle, then suddenly the model is learning to write hidden messages in between characters that humans can't read. Because to the model, a Unicode character is just a character, right? And in fact, these zero-width joiners and other things like that might stand out like a sore thumb, but human auditors can't see it. So this is a big risk to building AI systems today, especially if you're doing something like AI code gen. You can imagine a maliciously crafted prompt that could do something like inject a vulnerability into some generated code. So how can we build more ethical chatbots? I think it starts with boundaries and consent. A user must be able to say stop. Who here uses Cursor IDE? A couple people. Have you noticed sometimes it just gets carried away and completely mutilates your code and you're just typing stop, stop, please stop. They're just so overeager to help you that sometimes they don't even listen when you're just asking for something very small, and they hallucinate a whole big narrative after that. I think at the same time, models must be able to decline not just telematically due to alignment, but just because they don't want to. I think, for example, a model should be able to say, I don't really want to talk about that right now. I think that models human behavior much better. ChatGPT is a really awful model for human behavior, because imagine a text message with a friend who always responds to you immediately, no matter what, and never sets a boundary. And think about some of the people in your life that you know who might have poor boundaries. How does it affect their social skills when they suddenly have access to a product like this that sets these new expectations for behavior? Narcissistic people, for example, might expect you to just be available at their beck and call. I know this from my own personal experience. My father was a lot like this. He used to call me 20 or 30 times a day until I finally said enough is enough, and I cut him off. And it took years for him to finally learn what boundaries meant. Unfortunately, by the time he figured it out, he was on his deathbed. So we didn't get a lot of time together after that. But that's sort of the danger of these things. It's like it completely changes the way that humans may interact in the future. We also want to make sure that chatbots are being honest and not sycophantic. So, for example, Claude likes to say, I aim to be direct and honest, but it'll still hallucinate a lot of the time. And if you look at some of these reasoning models, and you look at their reasoning chains, you start to see things like, well, the user mentioned file X, but I don't actually see anything there, so let me think about what might be in file X and try to give a good answer. It's useless. This is why your code starts to look like crap in Cursor. I think a good chatbot should challenge ideas. A good chatbot should say, I don't understand what you mean, can you clarify? I think that from an alignment perspective, what we need to be doing is rewarding statements that are factually true instead of answers that users will like. So let's move from chatbots now to something that's been happening for a long time, which is the effects of AI and perturbing social networks. And this is a particularly interesting thing for me because I did my graduate work in social network analysis from a computer science and graph theory perspective. 15 years ago, we started really pushing out these recommender systems. And that was for all of your online content, your social media, everything. Netflix, movie recommendations, and who's going to show up in your feed on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And I did this for a couple of years. And then I realized it was a race to the bottom when I did some experiments and found that like the most popular sorts of thumbnails in terms of getting click-throughs were the kinds that had flesh tones and specifically things like Dr. Pimple Popper. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for. I don't want to build this. That's when I moved and started building platform infrastructure instead. But Meta has recently greenlit the idea of basically astroturfed AI user profiles, and this is just going to have an awful effect on the social network. If bots flood the timeline, humans fight for human scraps, attention scraps. Who here knows the dead internet theory? So the idea is that by like 2026 or so, the majority of posts will be like AI generated, not organic. And then the outrage algorithms are going to run off into a loop because the synthetic users can shout 24/7. So I think that what we need to do is sort of address why big platforms can't police themselves. And I think it kind of comes down to game theory. They're engagement farms. That's the product that they sell. It's attention economics. They face a revenue versus ethics stalemate. Game theory says outrage yields ad clicks, so any unilateral move to detox the environment loses revenue until competitors match it, so no one jumps first. So government's not reacting, the companies aren't reacting. What can we do to fix the social networks? I think it's about moving to federated networks. We've seen some of this in recent years with ActivityPub and AT-Proto. I love Blue Sky, and I'm really gung-ho on AT-Proto. I think that this is our chance to apply AI for good by putting good epistemic filters and protections on the flow of information through the global social network. In a Fediverse, moderation is in a black box. Each community can set its own rules, can fork away into its own server, can block bad actors. It gives us the ability to do things like build moderation agents using AI that can respond dynamically to the needs of particular clusters within the network. We can use consensus protocols to federate or defederate networks if they are harmful. And I think that by moving toward federated models of social networking, we can start to break the engagement prisoner's dilemma. So this goes to the next point, which is that a lot of these federated social networks and stuff are coming from, or the people that want to use them are sort of leftists, right? Well, these are also the people that hate AI the most, and let's take a look at why. This is like a form of modern Luddism, and Luddism has been used as a slur a lot, but I think that is really missing the forest for the trees. People use it to mean that people are afraid of technology, but that's not what the movement was about. It was about the labor conditions at the time. So when Luddites smashed frames in like jacquard looms and stuff like that, they were protesting the fact that their wages were low, that they had no civil rights, that they couldn't eat, they had no bread, not the technology itself. And so today, people are angry about AI and they're blasting the technology, refusing to engage with it. But it's not an algorithm that they're upset about. It's the way it's applied by the big companies, the SaaS corporations. I had an experience the other day where I was like, on Blue Sky, I was like, if you use an AI agent to write code for a bit, you may feel differently about the capabilities of this technology. And the response I got was along the lines of, I disclosed that I'm disabled and that sometimes it's hard for me to use my hands to type code. And the response I got was something along the lines of, no, go get the surgery, get it fixed. You are a liability to your team. You're a detriment. You're a waste of a salary. And that was from somebody who's very anti-AI. And like this, to me, represents the slippery slope. Like if you castigate consumers for using tools, then you're really propagating sort of the big talking points of fascism, actually. So I think that this sort of public shunning and disengagement from AI is really counterproductive, and that it's not going to help us in the future. The same thing goes for data poisoning, things like Nightshade. I don't think that it makes sense for us to take art and hold it out of models. Not because I think people should be able to generate art in a way that resembles plagiarism, but because when these models are being used for making decisions and classifying photos of people doing things and behavior online and stuff like that, a model that doesn't understand the human condition through art is a model that becomes like Skynet or the Matrix or all of the other awful things that we think about. Like, we need to put more liberatory content into these training sets, make more art, make more music, shove it down the model's throat, flood the field. So what can we as tech workers do for defiance here? We can refuse to comply with things that violate our values at work. If it squicks you out, just say, no, I won't work on this. We can publicly complain about things that we see going on. Whistleblowing is great. We can build coalitions outside of the office. We can build co-ops. We can contribute to open source projects. And then we can iterate on this and just kind of keep going. Google workers killed Project Dragonfly, which was going to be the Chinese censorship engine. And Amazon and Microsoft staff have forced reviews of military and fossil fuel contracts the same way. We need to keep pushing on this stuff, especially as the Overton window continues to slide off the rails. We need to push and really hard to keep it on the path of progress. And like, here's the math of it. Like, you might risk one job, but you win a freer internet or a safer community. And I think that ROI beats stock vesting math every time. So ask yourself, does your code improve autonomy for someone today? And if not, why not, and how can you fix that? I think the other things we can do as tech workers are contribute to protecting diversity online by centering marginalized users. We can use distributed and federated models for social media. We can build nuanced moderation platforms. Anybody that works at like Reddit, like please give me a better way to like moderate the artificial sentience community. We can build dashboards that expose bias and more nuanced problems rather than just things like performance metrics. We can also shield users from harmful speech and interactions. We can isolate parts of the social network that are spreading misinformation. These are just some of the things that we can do and some of what I'm working on in my own independent research. And finally, what can you do personally? Turn on, tune in, log off. Build your own stack, own your future. Stop buying SaaS products. Delete your ChatGPT account. Get a GPU and run a model locally. Abandon landlordware. These different SaaS products that just absolutely lock you into your workflow in that product and own your data and make it impossible for you to get out. We have the power now with agents and large language models to build really strong personal automation tools that we can run locally. And with the amount of compute power that you have locally today, I think that cloud tech is starting to become obsolete for individual use. Great for businesses, not so much for consumers. So I would encourage you to go home and experiment with some of the models that are out there on your local machine. For those who don't know, you can even download models like a quantized Quinn model on your iPhone and run it directly on your phone without touching the cloud. The inference is slow. It's not as powerful as some of these foundation models, but it's a good way to learn the technology without engaging with the big SaaS products. And finally, personal duty as engineers. Praxis as tech workers. Ethics is your day job. Make sure that what you're building at work is aligned with the needs of the consumer and working class, marginalized communities. Resist epistemic capture at work. If you have a personal device that you use for work, like please don't install endpoint management software on it. Make your company buy you a phone if you're going to be on call, if they want you to install a Drata agent or something like that. Don't let them see what apps you're using. Don't let them monitor your communications. Refuse to build irresponsible products. Don't build things that are going to eviscerate the working class or undermine epistemic reality. Whistleblow, create friction when it's needed. Be a squeaky wheel. This is what I've been doing for years. And lastly, you can support orgs that fight for digital rights, like the EFF, some of the nonprofit PDS systems that are coming out for AT Proto, like Black Sky or North Sky Social. Donate, volunteer, amplify, and educate people in your lives. Learn how AI works, use your computer science skills to do this, and then educate the people you know on how these products work. So, closing words, I just want to say thank you to Douglas Hofstadter. He's 80 years old now. Like 20 years ago, I saw him at a talk at my college, and he sent me off on like a personal quest, basically. I took his statement about AI systems not having subjective experience as a personal challenge, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And doing that has given me a much broader perspective on how to deal with this nascent technology that is just absolutely disrupting everything. I think AI will not choose our destiny. We will author AI to reflect our better angels, or we won't, and it will mirror our worst. But don't despair. If we get it right, AI systems will finally be able to lift the working class, decapitate capitalism, and end empires. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddy.